Thirdly, the police officer whose mind cannot control his physical or bodily appetites. In the first place, there are a number of officers who assume that their bodies and minds are not affected by alcohol and other drugs. And when they are allowed to carry weapons 24 hours a day, very often violence is precipitated by intoxicated or out of his mind or her mind officer who, with the freedom from drink or drugs, say what's on their minds, if you'll pardon the misuse of that term, cause an argument in or around a bar, and then precipitate violence by pulling out a weapon or a shield only after they have caused someone to reciprocate to them. The second area is that of the lawlessness, whereby the complete disregard for rules and regulations. There are many an act of violence precipitated in our communities by the officer out of uniform, in communities where badges are almost as plentiful as guns, who refuse to identify by way of an identification or ID card, and having caused somebody to respond to them, when they're asked for an identification, not only refuse, but you're called a wise guy, and immediately the violence comes. The rules and regulations require that a policeman identify himself or herself not only by way of a shield, which, as I said, are a dime a dozen, but also by ID card. And the third category, which I will stop, is that of the inability of a mind, if it's there, to control bodily appetites. Apparently, too many officers feel that a shield gives them the right to make any remark to any of our women that happen to appeal to their eyes. And whether that woman is alone or even accompanied by a male, the kind of remarks that they feel free to make, which any male with a woman, regardless of who she is going to come to her defense, again, is precipitation of violence. Apparently, the white officer thinks any black woman in a black community is fair game, regardless of who she is and who she is with. I just wanted to
appreciate your analysis. Thank you again, one and all. Ladies and gentlemen, our next witnesses is the Reverend Herbert Daughtry, chairperson of the National Black United Front, the national presiding minister of the House of the Lord Churches, accompanied by Dave Walker, chief investigator, Michael Amon-Ra, chairperson of the New York chapter Black United Front, attorney Alton Maddox, Ernest Wright, and George Edwards. Reverend Daughtry, we welcome you and your associates. We know of the great documentation you have been carrying on for years. And we will accept into the record without objection a statement you have previously prepared so that you may make whatever remarks are on your mind and heart at this time. We acknowledge the subcommittee, the incredible amount of work that you, your church and organizational leaders have been engaged in over the years, long before this hearing, in connection with ending police violence in your city. Welcome to these hearings.
Thank you very much, Honorable Congressman John Conyers and other members of Congress, Congressman Crockett. We know of your record in other incidents when you stood alone to represent people who were being brutalized. Congressman Rangel, and to our Brooklyn congressmen, longtime strugglers, Major Owens, Congressman Ed Towns, and to Councilwoman Gail Bowman. I wish first of all to introduce the members who are sitting here at the table with me. To my far right is our attorney, Alton Maddox, Immediately to my right is the hardest working, most dedicated brother. It has been my good pleasure to meet the New York chapter chairperson, Michael Alman-Ra. To my left and behind me a bit is my special assistant and chief of staff of the African People's Christian Organization, Charles Barron. And to my left here is our chief investigator, the brother who has compiled these statistics for lo these many years. And may I just say for the record, he has done it without funding sources. He has done it with great sacrifice to himself and to his family. Dave Walker. And his assistant to accompany the delegation to Washington, Brother Jimmy Anderson. Honorable members of the House of Representatives, the subcommittee, the Judiciary Committee of the House, on behalf of 99 9/10% of the black community, all liberal, progressive, decent, fair-minded citizens of New York, we welcome you to New York City, the Big Apple, and applaud your decision to conduct congressional hearings into police misconduct. Allow me to say at the outset that there is here, and we want to commend them, the Emergency Medical Services Black and Latino Guardian Association, who are providing free medical services at the risk of their jobs. As we came into the hearings, we began to receive requests for an opportunity to testify. Obviously, this congressional hearing does not allow for all of the testimonies, but there are many in the seats up yonder and yonder and yonder and over there who wait with written documents to add to the record. My organization, the Black United Front, was born in 1978 out of the community's protest over the 1976 police killing of 15-year-old Randolph Evans and the subsequent acquittal of Robert Tosney by reason of insanity, and the 1978 police killing of Arthur Miller, a respected businessman, husband and father. And for the record, may I just say that they claim Robert Tosney had psychomotor epileptic seizure. Nobody really knows what that is. In fact, the Epileptic Foundation issued an immediate rejection of any such disease. Since 1976, we have exhausted every avenue of appeal. On Thanksgiving night, 1976, when Robert Tosney, who had been summoned by neighbors who said that there was a disturbance, walked up on Randy Evans, who was 15, as I've indicated, and this lad came forward and said, "Officer, what's happening?" Tosney, without provocation or justification, shot him in the head. There is a pattern here that I want to note at the outset. Even when black citizens call policemen for help, oftentimes their relatives or some innocent black or Latino is beaten or killed. As one prize speaker has indicated, you take your life into your hands when you summons the police to help. But it is not so with respect to property. We have a saying in our community, if you want the police assistance immediately, do not say some poor black lies with his throat cut. Say the bank is being robbed. And before you put the receiver on the hook, the police will be there. In 1979, Louis Baez, who had a known history of aberrant behavior, was shot 21 times by at least 5 officers. On the day he was killed, his mother called the police for help. The officers arrived, and Baez leaped or fell from the fire escape into the yard. Police officers claimed that he had a knife, you know, the eternal shiny object. And I know that you will understand me what I say, you and all of the audience. If I were to say that if we had as many knives as they claim we have had, we wouldn't be in the predicament we're in. So they emptied their revolvers into his frail 125-pound body, plain cowboy with a human life. And no one was punished for this crime. On Sunday morning, when most people are on their way to church, January the 9th, 1983, Henry Woodley was walking with his sister and his girlfriend when he was confronted by attackers. His sister ran to get help from the police. However, when they arrived, Woodley was fired upon and killed by the police officer who escaped without punishment. One other example, I was going to put this in the record because this occurred the Wednesday before the hearings. Policemen were summoned to a street around the corner from my church. And for the record, by the way, I'd like to say I've been pastoring the same church for 25 years in Brooklyn, New York. Some youngsters were having an argument. One was alleged to have had a knife. When the police arrived, they commenced beating the black teenager while he and others, his friends, screamed, "He's not the one. He doesn't have the knife." All of this was happening while a white teenager who was his friend was screaming, "I have the knife. Here is the knife. Stop beating my friend." The police officer continued to assault this youngster who then suffered broken ribs, facial scars, and body bruises. These incidents indicate clear racist attitudes and actions. There is a conditioned reflex where blacks are concerned, whatever their age or sex. Police attack first and ask questions later. If they are black or Latino, surely they must be carrying a knife or committing some criminal act. After all, that is the way blacks and Latinos are portrayed in the larger society. So with the acquittal of Torsen in 1977, Black United Front launched a selective patronage campaign. In addition, we met, by the way, with our honorable, distinguished, illustrious mayor, who somehow still inhabits City Hall, my long and honorable friend, for he's an honorable man. So are they all who inhabit City Hall, honorable men. We met with Mayor Koch 12 days after he took office to entreat him to influence the U.S. attorney to indict the officer on the violation of Randy Evans' civil rights. The Black United Front has marched and demonstrated on numerous occasions. In July 1978, thousands rallied in Crown Heights section of Brooklyn to protest the killing of Arthur Miller. And you know what? Arthur Miller was one of those pull yourself up by your bootstraps success stories. He had a thriving business, enjoyed friendly relations with the police department. But on the evening of June 14th, 1978, he came to see about his brother who was discussing with the police a matter related to traffic violations. An altercation followed, and a number of policemen carried him off in their car. When he arrived at the precinct, he was dead. No officer was charged with any wrongdoing. In September 1978, thousands marched and rallied at City Hall to protest police brutality. In November 1978, thousands marched on Wall Street to protest police brutality. In August 1979, thousands rallied and marched in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, to protest the killing of Louis Baez. Likewise, there were rallies and marches around the killings of Louis Rodriguez, whose family was given a cash settlement. Arturo Reyes, 17 years old. Peter Funches. All of these persons were killed without provocation by members of the New York City Police Department. In June 1979, Peter Funches, I have his picture. This was a case very dear, very painful and deeply moving. We got his picture, Mr. Congressman. We understood that we needed to document all these things, and we have additional documentation, film, and whatever. But this is Peter Funches after they beat him. But let me tell you the story. In June 1979, Peter Funches' wife, recognizing that he was having problems. He was a 100% disabled Vietnam veteran. He had fought for this country. And she called the Veterans Administration for help. They never came. In the meanwhile, Peter began to react from his Vietnam experience and got in his car and commenced driving. This particular day, he drove until he ended up on a street in the Bronx. And for whatever reason, the policeman cornered him. There he was, according to witnesses, closed up in his car. And we can imagine, given the nature of his sickness and past experience, shaking like a leaf, the policeman broke open the car with crowbars and beat poor Peter Funches to death. Do you hear what I say? 100% disabled Vietnam veteran beaten to death by the New York City Police Department. Here is this brother here. The police said that he was in a car crash. But one of the eminent reporters, Mr. Earl Caldwell of the Daily News, noticed that there were certain discrepancies in the story. We went to investigate and took the photographs, as we have done on the numerous of occasions, which show there was no crash in the wall, no crash anywhere. By now, the policemen had changed their story. They said he had a knife, the eternal shiny object. No knife was ever found. The fact of the matter is that they beat this poor sick man to death. And again, we have shown you the pictures. Buff even conducted a sit-in. We even went to the federal court and sat in when an honor student named Jay Parker, whose father worked for the police, was killed. November 1980, the National Black United Front conducted national hearings on racist violence and collected testimonies from 21 cities regarding racist violence from police and others. In April 1980, NBUF organized a national march against racist violence. This was done again to highlight the magnitude of police violence against blacks. Since 1977, the Black United Front has repeatedly sought state and/or federal intervention. In 1978, we met with David Traeger. He was the then U.S. attorney on the Randy Evans killing. Nothing happened. he promised a decision on the civil rights violation charged by Spring. I have also enclosed correspondence that we sent to President Carter, the Justice Department, Governor Cuomo, and because we never received any response, we took to the streets. Now, it may be of interest to some, but I have correspondence indicating that when we first met with Ed Koch, and by the way, the minutes will indicate that I thought it was a cordial meeting. We will submit for your perusal the minutes from our initial meeting, January 12, 1978. We will submit to the congressional records the press release. We met with Commissioner McGuire time after time, and we will submit to the congressional records our recommendation, 14 recommendations. And do you know what one of the simplest ones was? We suggested that there be periodic meetings between community leaders and the police commissioner. And do you not know, honorable Congressman, that not one of these recommendations was ever implemented? If the simplest one of simply sitting down, meeting with community leaders, with their elected officials and appointed officials were implemented, maybe some of the long list of people that we are talking about would be with us today. And maybe your energies and our energies could be given to other constructive and positive pursuits. Congressional hearings, in fact, we will submit for your record a letter that I wrote to Commissioner McGuire, February 1978, urging him to get the meeting started. They were never started. Congressional hearings, blue ribbon commissions, and special state and federal investigations have been implemented to investigate police corruption. These endeavors are generally energetically praised by all of the respectable citizens. But when the investigation is directed toward police violence toward Black and Latino citizens, these same people become hysterical. Are these our leading citizens saying to us that in their estimation, policemen stealing money and peddling dope is more important than policemen taking lives? Mr. Chairman, local officials have failed to examine the problem of police brutality. Local governments must now be indicted for not indicting the police. This is not the first time that a congressional subcommittee had to examine police violence in New York City. Congress conducted an investigation in 1953. Afterwards, a police review board was established. 30 years have proved that the policemen cannot police themselves. Significantly, the Black United Front, frustrated with the continued killings and brutalizations of Blacks and Latinos and the refusal of state and all federal authorities to act, carried our appeal to the United Nations. On December the 11th, 1980, International Human Rights Day, the Black United Front, along with other organizations, went to the United Nations for assistance. The Black United Front also, along with other organizations represented here, appealed to the Organization of African Unity. His Excellency, Dramane Ouattara, who was at that time the Organization of African Unity's ambassador to the United Nations, issued a sharp statement comparing Arthur Miller's killing to Steve Biko's in South Africa. We will submit his statement for your congressional record. According to statistics compiled by the New York Metropolitan Area Black United Front's Police Brutality and Investigation Unit concerning police misconduct against Black people from 1978 to the present, incidents of police misconduct were an astonishing 605 reported cases. The breakdown of the 605 reported cases are as follows: killings by police, 92, beatings by police, 125, harassment and attacks by police, 57, shooting by police not resulting in death, 31, none followed through complaints on police with fear of police reprisals cited by complainants, 300. There are two other kinds of police brutality I need to mention. One is, has already been alluded to, when policemen attack crowds. The distinguished representative of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Unit pointed out that riot. We were leading that riot at that time. Wayne Barrett, whose article you're going to submit, was standing right next to us as we led the crowd. And do you know what, Congressman? We were attempting to lead thousands of people away from the precinct because we had word that they were provocateurs. We were leading them away from the precinct when the policemen ran into us with their cars. Not only that, on the Brooklyn Bridge, my wife and 3 children are here, on the Brooklyn Bridge, when we tried to protest to President Carter, he's concerned about Sharansky and Goldberg or somebody in Russia when policemen are killing us right here in New York City. And we marched across the bridge, and these same police officers came at us on horsebacks, women and children, and grind us into the bridge. These alarming statistics further substantiate the systematic and pervasive nature of police misconduct perpetuated against the black community in New York City. Moreover, the Black United Front Police and Investigative Unit statistics documents a substantial increase in the use of deadly force, abuse of authority, discourtesy, and ethnic slurs by police during the Koch administration, which began in 1970. From 1979 to 1983, the police killed 70 black persons, a sharp increase over previous years. Further statistical information, consult the attached. For further statistical information, we will submit to the congressional record. In addition to the statistical information submitted by the Black United Front, we submit an article entitled Deadly Force, the Debate Over Police Force, written by Wayne Barrett and appearing on the front page of the September 20th, 1983, A Village Voice. There are several significant points we need to underscore. First, it highlights the distortion of statistical information submitted to this congressional body by Police Commissioner Robert McGuire. Second, it further substantiates the claim by the Black United Front that there has been an increase of police killings of civilians in New York City during the Koch administration. Third, it also highlights some of the more glaring cases of unwarranted and unjustifiable use of deadly force by law enforcement agencies against civilians in New York City. In the interest of time, I'm simply going to submit it. I do have it included in my presentation. But what I'd like to point out in all of this statistical business, the statistics cited by McGuire are from the report issued by the International Association of Chiefs of Police in 1982. And the report only covers the period from 1975 to 1980, which does not touch the years of 1980 to 1983, which our records indicate are the worst years of police killing or police harassment under the Koch administration. But isn't it ridiculous that here we are talking about upmanship on who kills the most? How uncivilized can we become? What does it matter that some state or some city in the United States kill 1,000 citizens, unjustifiable, and New York City only kills 500? How uncivilized can you be? What are we doing with this gruesome upmanship? Shouldn't public officials say, wouldn't it be the right, decent thing for public officials to say, if there is one unwarranted killing in a city, in a state, the most thorough, impartial, independent investigation ought to be implemented so that justice might be done. Isn't that what ought to be said? But that is only indicative of the insensitivity of my good friend, the honorable man in City Hall, and they're all honorable men, Congressman. Several other comments further substantiate the racist character of the abuse of police power. A black police officer has never killed a white teenager, yet white officers have killed 11-year-old Ricky Borden, 11-year-old Clifford Glover. In fact, the city gave his mother some cash for that one. 14-year-old Claude Reese, 15-year-old Randy Evans, 15-year-old Jay Parker, 17-year-old Arturo Reyes, just to name a few. Now let me make a statement, and I hope for all the world you understand what I'm trying to do. I'm only trying to make a point. So all my good friends, I hope you understand. But I do wonder, Mr. Congressman, what would Commissioner McGuire say if black police officers were killing Irish teenagers? Yes, and I just wonder, and I know everybody understands, I'm just trying to sensitize the climate. What would Caruso say if black officers were killing Italian teenagers? I know everybody understands. And I wonder what our honorable Mayor Ed Koch would say if black officers were killing Jewish children. Would we have this vigorous objection to a congressional hearing? I think not. There's not a sane soul in the city who think that there would have been any vigorous opposition, any hysterical opposition to a congressional investigation. Black police officers have never killed or abused white officers by mistake. White officers have killed and abused black officers by mistake, they say. There is a disturbing dimension to this racist character of the abuse of police power, and it is overkill. According to several eyewitnesses, victims were reportedly kicked and beaten even as their bodies lie lifeless in the streets of New York. Paul Louis Baez was shot 21 times. I mean, how many times do you need to shoot somebody to kill him or to stop him? And you raised the question about a woman. I remember a woman named Miss Mangum, a couple of months after Louis Baez was killed. This woman was shot 5 times. 5 times was this woman shot. How many times do you need to shoot somebody to stop somebody? Does a big, bad police officer need to put 5 bullets into a woman? There is another point. It does seem, I hope I'll be understood here, but we got to get to the record of this. It does seem on this overkill that there are instances where white policemen have to kick black men in the groin. Now, that ought to say something to us, that it is not just the removal of a human being. There's something more fundamental and psychological going on here. It is the attempt to destroy the very essence, the very soul, the very spirit of a humanity. That's what it is. And Mr. Chairman, I cannot pass without making allusion to another form of police brutality. Many members in the community have prevailed upon me to make sure we put this in the record. And it is the undercover work of the New York City Police Department. How many of our brothers are now in jail, not because they committed a crime, but because there was a conspiracy which the police said, let's get somebody, and they stood around wondering what you're going to get and end up in jail. Many of our brothers and sisters are even now in jail, not because they've done anything, but because of undercover police work. And I'm certain you're sensitive to that, Mr. Chairman. After all, we've just come out of the Nixon administration. I can state without flinching that 99 9/10% Blacks in New York City believe that police misconduct toward blacks and Latino is a reality. The other 1% has some psychological problem. No one in the black community argues the question anymore. It is believed that the abuse of police power is not an isolated act committed here and there by a few policemen in clear and unmistakable violation of their superior wishes and directives, but it is deep, pervasive, and increasing, and is directly encouraged by the absence of strong, assertive, moral, no-nonsense leadership from the mayor of the city, who, by the way, is an honorable man. So are they all in City Hall are honorable men, though they are insensitive and unresponsive and downright anti-black and anti-poor. To illustrate, as I mentioned, we met with the mayor. We thought we were friendly. We were going to have a great relationship. All of our press statements will record that fact. He was sensitive. Wrote a letter to David Traeger for us. You'll see it on the record. Sent me a copy. We thought we had a great mayor. We were going to work together. He told us to meet with Commissioner McGuire, and if Commissioner McGuire did not respond, then come back to him. We met a time and again. We thought that this was going to be a great relationship. We said, oh, Mr. Mayor, if you're independent, we are too. We are independent. We are answerable to only our God and our people. We're going to have a great relationship. But down the line, the true nature of the inhabitant at City Hall began to come out. And so we have on file all this correspondence. Now, presently, with the pleas and petitions having been submitted to local officials simply because persons who are the victims of police brutality have no effective avenue to redress their grievances. In other words, that civilian review board is a misnomer. It's neither civilian nor is it a review, but it is the police. That's all that is. Nobody goes there anymore. We don't even bother that. We don't even honor it by appealing to it anymore. To appeal to it is to give it some kind of significance which it doesn't deserve. In each of every instance, the pleas have fallen on deaf ears, and the petitions have simply, for simple justice, have been denied. Presently, the city has advised civilians and has lulled them to believe that every person is the victim of police brutality may submit a complaint with the erroneously labeled Civilian Complaint Review Board. It is a violation of law for any civilian. Let me go back over there. It is a violation of law for any civilian or municipal official to review or pass judgment on a claim of a police misconduct. Thus, the local law allowing for the present review board mandates that the police must police the police. This arrangement runs counter to every notion of fairness, decency, and impartiality. In practice, this police review board not only officially sanctions police brutality, but makes every effort to exonerate the offending police officers while victimizing and humiliating the injured civilians. Over 97% of the complaints filed are summarily not dismissed. The overwhelming majority of the remaining claims are eventually dismissed. Consequently, every act of police misconduct is condoned and the police officer's record remains unblemished. These consequences are not surprising. It is an axiomatic concept and a fundamental principle of jurisprudence that justice can occur only when the fact-finding forum is impartial. The Knapp Commission explicitly found that the police cannot be trusted to investigate the police. In 1972, the late Governor Nelson Rockefeller, and may he rest in peace, in appointing a special prosecutor to weed out police corruption in New York City, made the following observation. This is from Governor Rockefeller, and may he rest in peace. Quote, I have taken this action in recognition of a fundamental reality that under the present circumstances, only an independent agency with citywide authority, assigned a clear and specific mission, and armed with full prosecuting power and independent investigative capacity can break through the natural resistance of government agencies to investigate themselves or their close allies, can overcome the forces of inertia, and can finally deal a decisive blow to narcotics, crime, and corruption in New York City. Now that's end quote. That's the venerable Governor Rockefeller, and may he rest in peace. I would simply add that it is equally true for policemen exercising violence. There is no way a policeman is going to mete out punishment on another policeman with respect to killing a black Latino youth or abusing police power. Benefiting from our own experiences, listening to testimony made at the people's hearings held in July 18, 1983, about police brutality, and adopting the findings of the Knapp Commission and the late Governor Rockefeller, the Black United Front advocates that the entire structure of the present Police Review Board be replaced. It is neither an independent nor an impartial agency. It has neither deterred nor reversed the rising incidents of police misconduct in New York City. Furthermore, the present Police Review Board only has jurisdiction over the New York City Police Department. Now, this may be important piece of information, at least it was to me as we did research on this. Acts of brutality committed by police of the New York Housing Authority, the New York Transit Authority, uniformed court officers, and other so-called peace officers are beyond the jurisdiction of any structured civilian or police review board. Just this past Thursday, Mr. Chairman, Michael Stewart was severely beaten by the New York Transit police officer after he was handcuffed. I just returned from the hospital. My wife went by to see him Saturday night. I wish sometime that all of these vigorous, hysterical opposers of congressional hearings and impartial hearings would just visit some of the people that have come through the police hands. Here was a young man, 25 years old, handcuffs, scars up and down his arm, up and down his leg. His neck is out this big, his head is bloated up, all on his body is a scar. Now, we have to ask, if the man was handcuffed, why did he need to be beaten? If he was beaten, why did he need to be handcuffed? I've been to many of these, Mr. Chairman. I've been in the room with many mothers and many wives and been in the hospital rooms. And do you know, according to the present Civilian Review Board, as it is called, that case cannot come before them. It is not constituted to bring that there. So who now will bring these culprits to justice? Who will say to Mr. Stewart and Mrs. Stewart, who were there in the hall, I tell you, Mr. Chairman, and to all of the people present, who will identify with them? Who will do something about this? And so, Mr. Chairman, all avenues for redress of grievances against so-called peace officers have been shut down. In New York City, civilians are at all times subject to the whims and caprice of law enforcement personnel. Since the city of New York has failed to take remedial action, the Black United Front calls for public referendum in November of 1984 to replace the present Police Review Board and to establish a thoroughly civilian review board which will have the power to investigate, to hear, and to take action against any member of the New York City Police Department, but also members of New York Housing Authority, New York Transit Authority, and any other so-called peace officer. The referendum will also empower the mayor. The mayor is, to some extent, powerless. Will empower the mayor and other elected officials to take action against police officers who violate any person's civil rights. In 1966, the Patrolman Benevolent Association stripped every local municipal official except the police of the power to investigate and to discipline police officers. This is an intolerable restriction. Mr. Chairman, this law must be repealed. Black United Front will be calling a meeting of concerned leaders and organizations to examine Buff's proposal for a public referendum to implement the plan of Buff for an effective review system in New York City to arrest the rising incidents of police brutality. Legal counsel for Buff has already formulated the proposed legislation which will stop the irrational and unfair practice of only allowing the police to police the police in New York City. We will muster all of our energies and resources to make this proposed law a reality in November of 1984. So, Mr. Chairman, I've been long, but it's been a long time waiting for you.
It took me a long time to get here.
And we're glad you're here. So we welcome you. So we welcome you to the Big Apple. Tragically, it is an apple with an awful lot of worms in it. The biggest, the ugliest, the most conspicuous worm is the police department. Unfortunately, there are those who condemn your presence, but their children and husbands and fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters have not been killed or brutalized by members of the New York City Police Department. They can write their editorials, do their politicizing, take care of their business, walk their street, enjoy their homes, secure in their membership in the dominant race and class. Why should so conservative and constitutional act as a congressional hearings into one of the systems within a society drive people to whip up racial antagonism and anxieties and raise questions of political expediency? The impartial observer is forced to ask, what are they hiding? If this is the finest police department in the country, then let the world come in and take a look. Open up the records. Invite everybody to come in and see what a noble, progressive, competent, sensitive police department this is. But the very fact that the media and the police department and public officials become hysterical at a constitutional, conservative congressional hearing, we are driven to no other reason for their action, but they have got something to hide. And what they have got to hide is the most vicious, brutal, savage, uncivilized police department in New York and across this country. On behalf of the National Black United Front, I respectfully submit this testimony, exhibits. By the way, one of the exhibits we will be submitting is our videotape. History has taught us to document everything we do. We have 6.5 hours of documentation that we put together out of our own expense that we will be submitting to the congressional hearings. Of course, since it come out of our expense and so we are a post-struggling organization, I'm certain that the rich federal government will somehow keep us doing these videotapes. So we will submit them to your congressional record, Mr. Chairman. And again, we appreciate your coming, all of the congressmen, my great friend Rangel, Owens, Towns, with whom we've worked so long. We appreciate your coming, and indeed, may it all bring about a better society for every citizen in New York City. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right. Mr. Chairman, I don't, we do have some witnesses. Would you allow me to bring our witnesses? I've been long, and I appreciate your patience, but these are witnesses who are the victim of these brutalities. And again, some of these brothers and sisters have been on the streets a long time. And would you allow a few minutes more for their testimonies?
Well, it took us a long time to get here, and so we're going to hear everybody that you wish to bring forward. Ask them to be brief.
Okay.
Corey Gibson.
I'm going to, some of them come forward, one of the things that we've always tried to do is maintain a close relationship with the people with whom we've been associated over the period of time. And this is Brother Dave Walker. If Brother Dave Walker would just say a word as to how the case has come to us. That is to say, we are a non-funded, community-based organization, and I think it is important for Dave Walker, who does all of this work, for which I sometimes get a little credit, to say how these cases come to him and then introduce the witnesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Daughtry. Good afternoon, Congressman Conyers. On behalf of the Police Brutality Investigation Unit, I would also like to welcome you to New York. In the sake of time, I want to move forth and kind of introduce a couple of our witnesses here. This is a young brother by the name of Corey Gibson, who a very close friend of his, Larry Dawes, was killed in 1983. I'd like to turn it over, on the sake of time, to Brother Corey Gibson.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and our distinguished guests. My name is Corey Gibson, and I come from the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood in Brooklyn. I like to tell my little story of how the New York police force murdered one of my best friends. I may have a smile on my face today, but I am deeply still angered over this incident that happened in March 15th of '83. My friend and I, we was on our way home from visiting one of his girlfriend's house in the Park Slope area of Brooklyn. As we proceeded to return to the Bedford-Stuyvesant area, a police car turning the corner of Claremont Avenue almost collided into us on our little moped. My friend Larry, he maneuvered out of his way and avoided the crash. So we proceeded, being that the police car didn't have any lights or sirens on, we didn't figure that, there was no problem. We just proceeded and went on about our business. But me, happened to be the passenger on the back of the bike, I happened to turn around to see what the police officers were gonna do. They came up the block at full speed. They came up the block at full speed with just their lights on. So being that we almost collided into them, I suggested to my friend that we should stop and pull over. But they was coming at such a fast speed that if he would have made an immediate stop, they would have just crashed us right then and there. So I suggested to him to pull on the sidewalk and slow down. So as we was about to slow down and we was on the sidewalk, the police car jumped the sidewalk and hit us. They hit us one time and we was about to fall off the bike. But that wasn't good enough for them. They speeded up and smashed us into a parked car. I wound up, I flew under the car, and then I was looking up at the police car over top of us. I'm under this car screaming for help, begging for help, didn't know where my friend was. But when the police got out the car, after they have rammed us into the parked car, he just got out and laughed. They took a 19-year-old man's life. He was just in his prime of his life. Only 19 years old. Just got out of high school. and they took his life, kicked him and beat him for what? A red light. And I feel that if we're gonna let the police force do this to another brother over a red light, imagine what they're gonna do to our women and our little babies who's coming up. I'm still deeply angered over this incident because the incident did go to the Supreme Court. But know what happened? Nothing. That's what happened, nothing. Police officers, they still on the force. Rookie cops, young rookie cops, 25 and 24 years old, on the police force for only 1 year, out there acting like Starsky and Hutch. They out there acting like Starsky and Hutch, Beretta and the boys. Trying to kill and trying to go after their first big bus, but they was wrong. They didn't know that, what had happened. And now my friend Larry Dawes, he's lying in a grave. His mother all distraught and depressed and all shooken up about what she should do over this situation. Who should she turn to get justice for her son? Who can she turn to? I like to know. I'm asking the congressman, who should she turn to?
Well, we're here to try to formulate some remedies. I don't think that we can dispose of this at the first 4 hours of hearings that are going to go on for months here. When I ask for the remedies and a special hearing on remedies, they're going to put together the dozens of solutions that have been brought forward here. Some of them are better than others, some are not going to work, some are going to be practical. But let's not try to solve each case at the hearings where we're hearing about the case for the very first time that it's been brought to our attention, sir. We want the forum to identify the problem and continue to document the racially motivated violence. All of us here are charged equally with that responsibility as fighters to end racism and police brutality.
I understand that, and I appreciate that very much. And I'd like to say thank you on the behalf of my friend Larry Dawes and myself. I'd just like to say thank you to my family who has looked after me after this incident, who has taken care of me. And I know, justice will be done sooner or later.
You're a brave young black man, and we all stand behind you, sir. I want you to know that. Thank you.
Our next witness is Roy Shabazz.
Congressman Conyers, Rangel, it's a pleasure having you here today. It's a pleasure for me to be here also to give an account of what took place in my situation. This was July 19th. I'm an electronic technician, and I was on my way home along with a lady companion when we were stopped by two police officers. They came over and they asked me for my particulars, which I gave to them. Approximately 15 minutes, they called me back to their car and handed me a summons, rolled it up like a cigarette. And after receiving the summons, the officer said to the driver, "Let's go," and immediately drove up onto the sidewalk, knocking me right into the light pole. I was angry, so I told him, okay, I would report this incident to the precinct. I got in my car, along with my lady companion, and we proceeded on for about 3 blocks. There, I could see the police officers coming behind me in the van that they were driving. There was no red lights, there was no siren coming on. However, we pulled up at the intersection, East New York and Schenectady. While we stopped there, the officers came and they hit my car from the left side. They crashed into my car and left a terrible accident. He jumped out of his car and said, "Okay, MF, you're under arrest." And I'm sure quite everyone knows what MF stands for, the abbreviations. So I did nothing, I just sat there. My engine was running. He said, "Okay, MF, I'm taking you in, you're under arrest." I still did not move. I reached out the window and I asked him, what was I under arrest for? He said, "Ask no question, nigger." He pulled his gun, he stuck it in the car. He said, "Okay, nigger, I'm gonna blow your MF brains out." He said, "Get out of the car." Immediately, the other officer, he ran around the other side of the car. He pulled my lady companion out, and in pulling her out, he punched me in the face about 3 times. They then proceed to pull me out of the car by my ears and by my throat. He pulled me out and kicked me about 3 times in the groin. The other officer, he came around, he pulled his billy club out. He slapped me a couple of times around my neck, in my mouth and stuff like that, twisted my arm and put the handcuff in one of my hands. By then a crowd grew. The people shouted for police brutality and began throwing bottles and stone. So they radioed for help. Approximately 5 minutes, a contingent of police officers came, and they asked no question. They jumped in and started beating on me, kicking me in the groin. I received about 8 kicks in the groin. I was taken to the police station where I was arrested. I was not told what I was arrested for. Apparently they pulled me out of my car and took me in and left my car running right at the intersection with the keys in the ignition just the same. I was taken to the police station with the handcuffs. There were several bruises on my hand from the handcuff. They abused my lady companion. They called us nigger and bitches and other various names. And I had to spend the night in jail. Now, this was really uncalled for. However, I saw the judge the next morning, and that's when I realized I was charged with assaulting a police officer in the 2nd degree. I was charged with reckless endangerment in the 2nd degree. I was charged with resisting arrest. And so I had to put up a bail money in order to get out of the courthouse, and also get a lawyer to defend me in this case, which cost me several money. All of this matter was really uncalled for. I was given a summons, not for what I was stopped for. And so there were several witnesses who went down. They filed a complaint with the complaint review board. They never get in touch with me until Friday, this past Friday. They called and said I'm to get in touch with them this morning at 9 o'clock when I had to be here at this hearing. That's when they first called me. So this is just how my incident going. Now my case is due up next Monday, and I'm still charged with these charges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Reverend Daughtry, we know that you have a file that probably goes into hundreds and hundreds of these kinds of cases. What we'd like you to do is continue this documentation and help us establish some kind of clearinghouse so that we can keep an orderly record of the statistics. Your fact-finding and careful record-keeping have joined with others to help refute some of the incredible discrepancies that have been submitted in the mayor and the police commissioner's testimony to this subcommittee. We congratulate you for your inspiring testimony and for your unswerving dedication to see that Black and Latin people, as a matter of fact, all people here in this city, are rid of this incredible oppression that is being visited in what appears to me to be a systematic manner, and that is being condoned by municipal leadership who are not in the police department. You know, this is not just the police department. There's something else wrong besides the police department as this hearing unfolds itself in these incredibly moving cases. Cases that would destroy any rational person's belief in a democratic form of government. Cases that belie the fact that we are not down south, but up south. The system here makes me wonder where I am. Is this the New York that I have come to and visited and worked with and enjoyed year after year for so very long, and now we hear this underside, this hidden part of New York, that only through the vigilance of you here who have forced this committee to bring itself here as a federal presence to join with you in this struggle, that we're now beginning to unfold to the world what is really going on and what the life of so many Black people is like in trying to merely survive in the largest city here in this country. And so you have my gratitude, you have my pledge that our committee and its efforts as a federally constituted panel will join in to rectify a situation that shames us all. And it's a problem of all of us. No Black people or Latin people anywhere in America are going to be safe or free until we free ourselves. In New York, in Mississippi, in the West, the problem is the same, and what we've uncovered is a cancer that goes to the heart of this frail and fragile American system. We're all in your debt, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Congressman Rangel.
Mr. Chairman, let me use your mic. Mr. Chairman, I want to join with you in thanking Reverend Daughtry for the patience that he's had over the years and the hard work and documentation that you and your great organization have done for these hearings. You know, it's been absolutely surprising how, as you pointed out so eloquently, how in the past couple of weeks, nobody has asked about the substance of the hearings, about the victims of the hearings, and yet we read in the papers about the atrocities that are being committed in South Africa, and certainly we hear what's happening in some parts of the South. It would appear to me that we could be proud of those of us that serve in government if we didn't have to rely on private Christian organizations to be bringing victims of acts that have been committed by public officials to have to take them to such an institution. But I do hope that the media that spent so much time in analyzing the political motivations of some of us, that spent so much time describing the size of the congressional hall, whether it's too small or whether it's too big, might take a look at some of the testimony that was received today and might think about ways in trying to bring some solutions and some answers to those problems, rather than spending the times in the editorials and in the stories talking about the personalities. It seems to me that you and other witnesses have done a great job in saying that you're screaming to be heard, you're screaming for equity, you're screaming for justice, and I can't see how any fair-minded person in the city and state of New York would think that it'd be unfair to the members of the New York City Police Department to have impartial, honest, sincere people review their conduct as they deal with other citizens of this great city. So you brought your facts before the committee, and certainly a record has been made by the chairman and the subcommittee, as well as to Judiciary Committee. I only hope that the people in the city of New York will be responding in the same way. I thank you for your testimony.
Congressman Major Owens. No, but I want him to sit over there.
No, I think most of us are not surprised at all at the statement made by Reverend Daughtry, but I think, Reverend, what you have done today is show to a wider audience that not only is the Black United Front on the cutting edge, as militant as necessary, but also you are thorough, you are doing a thorough job of documenting and researching this problem. You have followed it from the very beginning. You have made every effort to take a conciliatory approach with Mayor Koch and the other city leaders, and all of that has fallen on deaf ears. If there's anybody who has acted responsibly in this whole matter, it has been the Black United Front. And I think you're to be commended for that, and the record ought to show that.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. You should know because you were on the bridge with us when the horses came down upon us. So we appreciate your presence, your comments.
Congressman Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to join my colleagues in saying to Reverend Herbert Daughtry and the members of the Black United Front, we appreciate your bringing to our attention the seriousness of the situation. You know, I think that the 1% out there that you talked about, I think after hearing your testimony, I think that the 1% now should think differently. Because you pointed out that the situation is very serious and we must address it immediately. I think you've made some very sensible recommendations, and we will do whatever we possibly can from this committee, I'm certain, to make certain that some of these things come about. So we appreciate the effort and the time that you put into it, which points out that we need more organizations around like yours that will go out there and spend the time to document it. And I think that you said that you're not funded, and I think that should go out loud and clear, that's an organization that's volunteering this time, which further points out the credibility of your organization.
Every day, all week. Testing. Congressman Conyers, before we officially submit the documentation that our national chairman, Reverend Daughtry, has stated will be submitted to you, we would ask that you allow us to have one more testimony from a victim who has had a hardship coming here today, and this will be the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Congressman Conyers and subcommittee. My name is Ernest Wright. I live in Brooklyn. I'm married, father of 5. On June 5th, my wife either jumped or fell from the 6th floor of my apartment building. When I was notified, I rushed downstairs. My wife was still alive. The paramedics came and they were working on her. The first 2 police persons on the scene were female, and they were very professional. While they were working on my wife, I was sitting to the side when the sergeant came, and one of the female officers was filling him in. She said to him, matter of fact, there's the husband there. The first word out of this man's mouth was, he probably pushed her. I started walking toward this man, and I called him an insensitive bastard. That's what I called him. He kicked me in the stomach, and at the same time, his driver, I think it was his driver, he had a baseball cap on, got me in the infamous Miller chokehold, and at the same time had his billy club out. The only reason why my brains wasn't scrambled on the spot was the fact that a friend and a neighbor of mine who is also a police officer saw it going down, and he told him it's not going down this way. Okay? I now have 2 children at home, one a 9-year-old and ironically, a 21-year-old female who will become a transit police sometime in January. This sergeant was nothing. He's nothing. But he represents the police of this city. And I am telling you, this man, something has got to be done to this man. I want something done to him. They called me and told me to come and see them at a certain time. And if that wasn't fast enough, to come at my own convenience. I went down there. Guess who's investigating this? Another sergeant who, when he interviewed me, I could see he didn't believe a damn thing I said. He didn't believe nothing I said. Then he tells me he's the investigative arm. I have submitted my witnesses. He says, I want you to canvass the neighborhood and come up with more witnesses. That's his job. I'm not a policeman. There's plenty of them out there, and they will tell a story. I have enough witnesses, but this thing will never be heard. I know it'll never be heard. So at least I can tell the world what's going on here. See, what I really want to do is get satisfaction, but I can't because I have children to take care of. But the one thing I wished on him was the same horror be visited on his family that was visited on mine. Thank you.
I want to thank you again, Reverend Daughtry, and all your associates and your organization for your great help. Thank you very much.
We want to submit it for the record, Mr.
Without objection, the records and additional information will be incorporated in the record at this point. Please turn it over to her. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Before we go to our next witness, I've been advised that we now have a special visitor in the form of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Would you welcome Reverend Jackson to these proceedings? No, he won't be.
Hurry! Hurry!
No.
Hurry!
Will the subcommittee come to order? We welcome the Reverend Jesse Jackson, recently returned from a European trip, and he has indicated his recognition of the importance of these hearings. We're honored. The subcommittee is deeply pleased to have him join us at these proceedings. Our next witness is the staff attorney for the New York Civil Liberties Union. Attorney Richard Emery has worked diligently in police violence cases, and he is our next witness. If you can find the right microphone, Attorney Emery, we welcome your
who have invited testimony on the crying issue of police abuse. We have, over the past close to 20 years now, handled police abuse cases, addressed legislation to the issue of police abuse, and educated the public as best we were able on the issue of police abuse. It is of the highest priority to the New York Civil Liberties Union. In the last 6 years, I personally have represented numerous plaintiffs in police abuse cases and done what I could in a small way to redress the problems of police abuse. In that capacity, I've represented people, and I might say these people have almost been uniformly black, Hispanic, gay, or other minority. I've represented people who were choked, who were beaten with nightsticks, who were kicked while they were on the ground, who was smothered, who had a police 38 placed, in one case, in his mouth, who had fingers broken, who had dental plates broken, who had their prosthetic devices, a prosthetic leg, destroyed, who were strip searched, women who were strip searched in public areas of police precincts, and numerous people who were insulted, including not only racial epithets, but insults which said, "Go on to the CCRB and complain. We don't care. They won't do anything to us." These cases involved many police officers from every borough, and they obviously troubled me over the course of my representation of my clients. Not only the cases I handled, but the hundreds and hundreds of cases which I had to turn away and which the NYCLU had to turn away, where similar stories that I had no doubt were true were also told. What I did, and what members of the staff at the NYCLU did, was search for alternatives to the individual representation of people who complained about police abuse. We observed that it was a systemic and endemic problem in New York, not something a couple of lawyers, either at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund or at the New York Civil Liberties Union, or like Vernon Mason, who you will hear from later, not something a couple of lawyers can do anything about. This is a systemic, endemic problem rooted in the New York City and presumably other police forces around the nation. So what we tried to do is we tried to search for alternatives to individual representation of plaintiffs. In that regard, we dealt with prosecutors among many localities. We dealt with the Civilian Complaint Review Board. In the process of dealing with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, I personally reviewed more than 15,000 Civilian Complaint Review Board complaints. I read them all. And what I saw was a pattern of police abuse that reinforced my belief that this was a systemic, endemic problem. The pattern that I observed included such actions as abuse in many, many instances, in, let's say, more than 100 instances of those 15,000 complaints, of pregnant women. Abuse of course, arrested persons who came into the custody of police officers, but more significantly, systematic abuse of bystanders to arrests, people who were only watching arrests or questioning arrests, and people who called the police for help. People who were seeking assistance from the police were routinely abused. Finally, we dealt with the police themselves in seeking to redress this systemic and endemic problem. From those three sources, as you can expect, hearing what you've heard today, we got no satisfaction. Or I might say, very little satisfaction. However, the process of looking to these sources for alternatives to the individual representation of people who complained led us to conclude that, in fact, in New York, police abuse is accepted and it's tolerated at all but the highest levels of the department and of the governmental structure. It's accepted and tolerated specifically in many, many precincts and in many, many units of the police force where there is an atmosphere among supervisory police officials that allows officers to get in their licks. As Reverend Daughtry alluded earlier, it's tolerated in much the same way that corruption was tolerated in the early 1970s. And I think it's instructive for this committee, for this group of esteemed congressmen, to look to that experience, the experience of police corruption in New York, with respect to devising solutions to the current police abuse problem. The fact is that in the early 1970s, the problem of police corruption was addressed largely through federal intervention. Federal intervention is again needed to address the problem in New York of police abuse. Presumably that's why you're here. Now, why is federal intervention needed? And I'll be brief. Federal intervention is needed because local prosecutors simply do not effectively prosecute police cases, even in the few cases when they want to. They can't. They have a conflict of interest. They work on a day-to-day basis with the police. The police know how to manipulate the grand juries, and the local prosecutors have no expertise in prosecuting police. It takes an expert to prosecute a police case. What about federal authorities as they presently exist? Federal authorities as they presently exist have not prosecuted any police case in any memory that anyone that I talk to about this matter can conjure up. Federal authorities have other things on their mind, and they simply do not prosecute police abuse. Well, what about this thing called the Civilian Complaint Review Board? Well, we all know that, and we've heard over and over again, that the Civilian Complaint Review Board is more likely to be called a Civilian Cover-Up Review Board. The Civilian Complaint Review Board is a sham, and it simply doesn't work.
Thank you, sir.
Well, then what about the Internal Affairs Division of the Police Department? They were very effective in the effort against police corruption. The fact is, the Internal Affairs Division of the Police Department simply doesn't have enough person power and simply has too much of an obligation to stem continuing police corruption to be devoted to police abuse. Finally, what about the lawsuits that people bring as a result of police abuse? All the lawsuits do is line up the city and the police department and the corporation counsel's office against the person who complained of police abuse. They never then look at the police officer who committed that police abuse, because to do so would be to subject the city to liability, to money damages. So they defend the abusing police officer instead of looking to their own in a way of disciplining their own. Consequently, since each of these institutions, which we would hope would address police abuse, have failed to do so because of their other obligations, because of their conflict of interests, and because of their close ties to the police department, we now have to look to the federal authorities for remedies. Briefly, the remedies that the NYCLU would begin to suggest that you consider are an expansion of the criminal civil rights statutes, which now limit federal prosecutors to either a 1-year sentence or a 10-year sentence, and limit thereby all the discretion which avid expert prosecutors need to fashion prosecutorial cases to the individual circumstances of a particular